as people are watching it, if people are watching it online, I would like any bit of feedback you can as far as are the lines straight behind Mike. They stare at him the whole time. I'm a little concerned that they might be slightly off. And
or on the camera, the light up at John's head.
there we go. A little shine on the wrong angle. So as you can see, we're still getting everything situated. So much of the financial world, like we've talked about, so much of that leads to you can find financial ideas in so many different spaces, but it's the financial coaching that's so important, right? It's the, hey, I had 3 people give me 3 different ideas. Which one actually fits best for me?
Yeah.
Right. In that conversation. It literally was just going through this with my wife the other day. Her work accounts changed to a new custodian.
Yes.
You go through the new custodian, and so I'm looking at the holdings, and she's of course, we're sitting down going through the holdings, and they do a questionnaire. And my wife said to me, she goes, so this questionnaire is trying to check my risk tolerance so they can make recommendations. So that's exactly what it's doing. She goes, it has no idea what other money we have, where we're at with all of the rest of our stuff, where we're at. She goes, seems like a CYA, questionnaire. I said, unfortunately, that's the design of a lot of stuff right now. So it's not true financial planning advice you're getting at this point, or true holistic planning, or any of those conversations. It's more specified for this account. And so a lot of people don't realize that. And that was why we think this podcast is so important, is so people can start putting the pieces together and know where to go to get those answers.
Exactly. Because, of course, there's no tax advice on that stuff either,
Sure,
right?
Not at all.
And so it's funny you say that. I just did it with the same thing that they changed custodians on my son's 401k. And so we had to just go through the whole thing, even logging in and all that stuff.
Yes,
was difficult for him, but we got it all set up, and the same thing, same questionnaires and everything else. And it does, that is most of the money he has. Obviously, he's got some after tax money too, but the issue really comes down to it is when you're dealing with some of that stuff, it can be difficult,
For sure.
But looking at it on an island and not as a whole, so if we look at that. So that kind of leads us to our conversation today, because, we as a firm, we do live workshops, as well as, in colleges and
webinars,
restaurants, a lot of those dinner seminars as well, throughout the state of Michigan. And obviously the webinars are national, right?
Sure.
When we do that.
Sure.
And one of our most popular subjects is taxes and retirement. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons we want to talk about a little bit about that today, because of the fact that that is probably one of the biggest missing pieces that we see when we deal with individuals, and as a holistic advisors, we will recommend or refer, I should say, our clients to whether it's accountants or attorneys, dealing with estate planning, or in this case scenario, that would be the taxes, and with written permission or verbal authorization, we can then, speak to these individuals and then do that comprehensive, tax plan, which that's what we're going to really talk a little bit more about today.
Well, and it's interesting because when you sit in front of people, and I know people are watching this, so if you're watching this, the visual, I can try and explain it to people just listening along. The visual on this is, when we meet people, there's 3 different types of taxes, right? Well, that's not just when we meet people, but in general, we talk about the different types of taxes: tax-deferred account, a taxable account, and a tax-free account. And the visual, when we first meet people, we show them, if you think of a 5-gallon bucket, a big 5-gallon jug, and we say, this is where most people are with most of their assets. And that would be our tax-deferred money, right? And then we show people like a red Solo cup, like an 8-ounce, a 10-ounce Solo cup. And that's mostly taxable money. And then we show them a shot glass and, a little Dixie cup, and that's where the tax-free money is. And we need to even those out through lifetime, but that's the visual that people start with when we talk about taxes and retirement. So if you're listening to us, that's how most people listening to this are. If you're different, fantastic for you. You already have a plan, you're working. But if you're not, most of the people we meet, this is a really, really important part of the conversation, right? If you think about it, we'll give examples as we talk through today on some of the things we talk about with people, but it is a vital piece of planning. And when we talk with families, when we talk with people, this is the one, like you said, Mike, that most people know they're missing. They just don't know how to handle it. Some people think that it is handled. like they just assume it's being handled, but the other people say, no, I know it's not being handled, but I don't know where to go, right? And so in that situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is important because the middle class millionaires that we work with on a regular basis, a lot of their times their largest chunk is that tax deferred bucket that you just talked about, because it's going to be in the retirement funds,
Right,
whether it's IRAs or 401ks or 403bs or 457s. And a lot of people also think they're getting the tax advice that they think they're getting, but there's a big distinct difference. So John, why don't you tell us a little bit about the difference between like tax recording versus tax management or tax planning?
So it's a great point. So generally when we file our taxes, right, if we're preparing our taxes or we're doing taxes, which we have to do every year, right, we're filing our taxes for the previous year. So if it's 2024, we filed taxes for 2023, 2025, you understand that we all know that. That is, like you said, Mike, it's recording, it's a tax history, it's what you did. You can't go, I know it's a silly example, but you can't go on vacation next week and then the following week go, oh, I want to change what I did on vacation, right? Because the time is already passed.
Too late, yeah.
That's what tax history is. You're recording what you did. Tax planning, tax management, those are action words, right? That's planning in the future, or that's planning now for what I'm going to report or how I'm going to report it. And the key on taxes in retirement is that not all money is taxed the same.
Exactly right.
Yep. So because not all money is taxed the same, you can plan this in many, many different ways to organize and try and do it as little as possible. And I know it's a bad example, right? But if you pick a billionaire, and people pick different billionaires that they like or follow or whatnot, Warren Buffett or Elon Musk or Mark Cuban, their taxes are being filed completely differently than the average American.
Exactly.
Because they know the tax rules. And so that's what taxes in retirement should be talking about is what are the rules you should know as an individual?
Well, and the thing is, there is, of course, tax codes that are several Bibles long, right?
Sure.
As far as using the different, loopholes or the different things for tax advantages. But the issue is you talked about the billionaires, okay? Most tax laws are not passed for the billionaires. Who are they passed for? They're passed for the middle-class individuals. And so, but the average person doesn't know how to utilize them either,
Correct.
And so that's really what becomes important. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, because there are just a few little things that we can do.
Absolutely.
Just on an everyday basis that we can help with some of that stuff.
And I think the other part of this is, when we're talking through this, as you're listening to this, if you take it as an idea to say, hey, let me open up my world and think through this. Finances are so important, but the statistics have shown this. If Vanguard Investments did this, they do kind of a state of, they put out their state of information on a regular basis. And some of their statistics in the past, they said, if you pick the right Vanguard fund, and I'm not saying I picked it, I'm not recommending them or anything like that, but
yeah,
what they said was, if you picked the right fund in any given year, because one fund might perform better than a different one get based on different market conditions or economic situations.
Exactly.
Right?
We've seen those scatter plots before.
Yes. So if you pick the right one, you're between 0.5% and 1% better in any given year. And that's real money. That matters. But if you do tax planning, you're between 1% and 3% better every year if you minimize your tax footprint. So that's almost, in math, that's a 3 times multiplier to do the tax planning conversation. Now, again, those are generic examples. I'm not saying you're going to guarantee yourself doing this, you're going to have 3 times more money. I'm not using, but it is showing that how vital it is to address the taxes and the tax footprint and to start doing it sooner rather than later, right? We have no idea where this tax code is going to change or going to go based on elections and in Congress or whatnot. I heard a conversation the other day. I was listening to a lobbyist and talking, and what he said was, it didn't matter how many people in the United States wanted a functional tax code. If 218 Congress people from around the country decided they wanted something, that's what was going to happen. And whether we agreed with them or not, they're the ones that we voted to put in place. He then said that the average congressperson, if you think about it, how much is like red states or blue states or whatnot, that a lot of Congress is placed simply because they won the primary election, because they're running in a reliably Republican district or reliably Democratic district. Okay.
Yep.
Let that number of how few people vote in primaries, it means very, very few people put the people in place that are making our tax laws. So we have to then take, and I'm not saying that is to be negative or scary or whatnot. I'm just saying we have to be aware of what is in place. We have to make smart decisions on a regular basis.
Yeah. And yeah, the tax code, well, we know what's going to sunset, at the end of 2025, but what's going to happen in the future is what we don't know. And there was a lot of promises that were made during this last election. And is it going to be true or not? Who knows? Or what's going to actually happen? And like you said, or what's going to be attempted to happen, but is it going to be blocked by Congress or going to be passed by Congress, et cetera. So we just have to make decisions based on the information that we have today.
Absolutely.
Okay? And it's really important to do it on an annual basis because this is an ongoing process too.
Well, that is exactly correct. If you think about taxes in retirement, if that's what our term is we're using, well, in retirement, there's a lot of things that are going to happen to you no matter what you do, right?
Yeah.
You're going to age. And if you have retirement accounts, there's going to be a point where you hit the age of majority, depending on the law in your current age and how it's grandfathered in. It might have been 70 and a half, might be 72, 73, 75. The required minimum distribution is something you have to do. If you have retirement assets, you're going to have to take a minimum distribution from a tax-deferred account. And the government is going to want you to pay taxes on that money. So that's got to be part of your plan in any facet as you start looking towards it.
Well, and there's two major problems. The one of the problems is our national debt, right? And so when we look at revenue for the U.S. versus the revenue we have coming in versus the government spending, right? They're always spending way more than what they're bringing in. And so the national debt continues to grow. And so if you ask yourself, listening to this podcast, do you think taxes are going to go up in the future or do you think they're going to go down, right? The average person, just logically, they're going to have to go up. Why? Why? It's because the debt's continuing to grow. We're not bringing in the bills, just like in your and I household. If we're bringing in, $100,000 a year and spending $120,000 a year, how long is that going to last, right?
Well, and if you look at the statistics, we are an aging population. Part of it is fertility and the changes in that situation. Part of it is just our aging population not having more kids. Part of it is not people, just the design of the family. We're not having as many workers, but around the world, we're having less people in the working force. And if you go from like 2000 to 2020 to 2040, you start looking at that, the statistics are we're going to have less people working in prime working age. That's a difference too, because that means there's less tax revenue. There's less money so there's less money that's going to be paying into Social Security. There's so many different steps you can go down where there's a tax concern based on just even aging, right? So taxes in retirement is years ago, I heard somebody say the two most important things in retirement that you pay attention to outside of your health, right, were taxes and healthcare.
Yeah.
Well, healthcare, we've talked about many different times with Medicare and the different conversations. We've had guests come on and talk about it in previous seasons. We'll talk about that again. But the tax conversation is just the biggest thing I think you can personally manage to try and get yourself in the best situation possible.
Well, they say as long as you're healthy, your biggest bill in retirement is going to be your tax bill. Okay, so it does become important to utilize some of those strategies.
Well, and Mike, if you think about it, we've talked about this in the past as far as what different taxes are, right? And we're not talking about your property tax, or we're not talking about your sales tax or things like that. We're talking specifically about your income tax in retirement and what
both federal and state income taxes. And obviously different states, it has a big difference too, right? So we have to kind of consider some of that stuff too. So let's talk about that then, John. What are some of the strategies that we can use? Obviously we got to be very general when we talk about some of this stuff. And we've seen many, many, many specific examples that we've really, utilized and people we've seen save, tens of thousands of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars over their life expectancy by using proper tax planning strategies. And we've, just like the statistics you're talking about earlier, we've read a lot of things about that too, about, by doing proper tax planning, how much people can save over their life expectancy.
Well, and I think if we're going to talk about it generically, I think we have to separate two conversations here. I think there's two types of money, right? There's, if we, to try and not make it complicated, we're just going to use simple terms. There's things you can control and things you cannot control.
Exactly.
Right? So you have uncontrollable income. If you have uncontrollable income, that would be things that it's coming no matter what. I'm happy it's coming. I have to deal with the tax consequence. Easiest example would be Social Security when you're of age, right?
Yeah.
It's going to come every month.
Yep.
You're glad it's coming, but you can't control that necessarily. You wish you could, but it's there. If you have a pension, that's uncontrollable income. It's coming whether you want to or not, right? But a pension is different than work. you technically control what you're getting paid at work, depending on the job, depending on if you want to keep working or not working.
If
or
you're contributing to your retirement plan. Exactly.
So uncontrollable income, that is our starting point with any person that's listening to this. You have to figure that part out first, because that's your anchor or your organization point. Hey, I have uncontrollable income of X number of dollars a month. Let's just use a round number and say $4,000 a month. Well, okay, if I have uncontrollable income of $4,000 a month, then I have to control everything around that. So I get to then controllable income. Do you want to mention like sources of controllable income examples?
Well, I mean, basically then it comes down to, that's a good example. Let's say they're bringing in $4,000 a month, but they want to live at $6,000 a month,
Sure.
right? And so then where do they get that extra $2,000? They have to take it from their investable assets.
Sure.
And so usually then when we're talking about uncontrollable income is where do we take it from our investable assets? And so as John was talking about the buckets earlier, is it from our tax-deferred bucket? Is it from our taxable bucket? Is it from our tax-free bucket? So we get to now then control where do we take our income sources from and where's the best place. And this is where we see some of the biggest strategy advantages when we're dealing with some of the individuals and the families that we work with, is the fact that now understanding where's the best place to take it from.
Right.
Okay. And that's difficult sometimes, right?
And there's so many different, even among the financial industry, there's so many different people that have different ideas, right? You
different philosophies for
you've
sure.
seen different philosophies and trying to figure out what best fits. I think as you're listening to this, I think the key thing here is trying to figure out not necessarily exactly what your plan is, because that's hard to figure out. You need to talk with people, you need to look at and interact, but what your concept of it is. And what I mean by that is I want to pay the least amount of taxes possible in any given year. I want to pay the least amount of taxes after a certain age. I want to leave the biggest legacy to my family. Those could all be different conversations. Now, sometimes they might be the same one, but you kind of have to look at that in that situation. There is, am I single or am I married?
Joint
Right?
taxpayer versus single taxpayer.
So there's different conversations first off that you have to talk about as far as what you're thinking from the tax.
Are you drawing Social Security or not?
Yeah.
You can delay one of the two Social Securities if you're a married couple too. And does it make sense to do that? So that we can control some of the taxes. So even in that case scenario, controllable versus uncontrollable, there is some control about Social Security alone. When do you take it? Once you take it, you're right, it's uncontrollable. And so a lot of it is now understanding the different income strategies that we want to use and the different taxable strategies, because at some point there's this magic age, and we do know that the middle class individual, middle class millionaires that we deal with oftentimes has the significant portion, and oftentimes it's over 80% of their portfolio is in this tax deferred structures, these 401ks.
And that logically makes sense, right? I mean, if you're thinking about this, if you're listening to this, retirement accounts became active in the 70s, right? The change in the pension laws was in 74. The 401k was in 78. I mean, historically, it makes sense when these came out. If you then look and say, okay, I've worked for 30 years, you should have some assets in these accounts. And logically, that's why it makes sense that it's one of your biggest accounts, right? Because you've been putting money in there for that many years, and it's been growing. It's been a phenomenal savings program, right? It's a great savings idea. And so that idea of those assets, when you get to the spot though where you have to start using it, the old thinking was that I'm going to put money in now when I'm in a higher tax bracket, and I'm going to take it out in the future when I'm in a lower tax bracket, and I'm going to have made more money. And that isn't necessarily what's playing out for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not always the case, and when we look at that. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the pensions anymore.
Sure.
Okay, so they have to start drawing from these plans. And so, the good news is there is some planning strategies that have come up recently, like the 401ks. Most of them do offer a Roth
401k now.
Roth 401k now. Where it's
and company matching with that now this year. Yep.
And so it's now, is that the right thing or not? Obviously that's why we have a job,
right,
because
right.
It's sometimes it is important to have a little bit of both, but it's just, what is that weighting, and what is that? We want to get more than that little shot glass sometimes by the time they retire.
Well, and you think about that. So if we're using our example of what are some strategies for taxes in retirement, I think generically most people are going to say, hey, I want to pay the least amount of taxes possible, right? I mean, that's fair, right? So if we're looking at that from that situation, we go back to our controllable and uncontrollable, and we say, hey, how much money do we have? So we need to know the numbers. how much, you said something really, really important. How much do they want to live on, or how much do they need to live on? Those might be two different numbers in retirement when you first retire. Well, I'm used to making $120,000 a year. Well, that may not be what you need in retirement. You don't want to pay taxes on $120,000 a year if you only need $72,000 a year, right? So that's a conversation you got to coach and figure out about.
Well, and is that, if you're going to take out that extra $2,000 a month in the example we talked about earlier, how much of that's taxable? So is that, do I need $2,000 net, or do I need $2,000 gross? So it's controlling the taxes, because oftentimes the difference it may be a difference if you're paying an extra $500 a month in taxes. Okay. But that may be the difference, right? If we can save that you can spoil your grandkids.
For sure.
You could go out to lunch and not worry about it. Have that extra golf round. There's lots of things we can look at.
What's really interesting though, Mike, and we do this job. So if you're listening to this, as you're listening to this, that's not necessarily always the case though. How often do you come across somebody that they when you have this conversation, they go, I'm not so worried about the taxes, or I'm not. And it is the financial coaching of the idea of saying, this is what this really means, right? If you ask somebody that's not retired, how much they need in retirement, they're going to say, I need what I have, what I'm making in work. And they have no idea the tax consequence, or what it is, or where it goes, or what it's going to mean, right? Well, I'm making $100,000. I need $100,000. No, because you're not going to be putting into a retirement account anymore. You're not going to be probably eating out, for lunch every day. You're not going to have to spend the gas because you're not going in. You're not going to need the work clothes, or what, there's examples of things you're not going to need. You're also hopefully, going to have certain things that you take. Hey, I'm not paying into the mortgage anymore because we paid it off before I retired. Or, you have certain things that are going to adjust. But when you talk about the taxes and you talk about this conversation, what you said was so important. This tweak saves you $500 a month. My goodness, I don't care where you are in numbers. If you just do the math on yourself and break it down, my mom broke it down weekly for her. Okay, well, that's $500 a month. Well, that's $125 a week I can spend. That's unaccounted for money that I don't need to think about anymore, because now I have it every month. That's a lot.
And if we put pen to paper, oftentimes it's huge. Okay, well, and again, depending on your financial situation, $500 a month could be all the difference in the world. And it may not be a huge difference. It may be more money you're leaving your kids. But the issue is then if you do the math, okay, now that's over 10 years, that's $60,000, or if it's over their life expectancy, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, that could be the difference.
And then the growth on that money too, Mike. Exactly. And then what's interesting though is, I'm curious on your situation. I have found in the last handful of years, as we've been doing these workshops, I found when we first started doing the workshops, people were coming and they were wanting to listen. And I would say, I'd ask the question, what have you seen? What tax planning have you done already? What have you seen? And most people, it wasn't even a thing that they even knew of. Yeah. It was like now you're at least starting to see this generation of people saying, no, I want to do this. What are the steps? And back years ago, we'd say, hey, here's an example of something you can do. And people go, well, that's only saving me a few $100s a month. I'm not worried about it. That's not changing my life. Now you're seeing people saying, I'll do whatever I need to do to save any dollar, right?
Every penny counts, when it comes down to that. People are getting be more aware, and so what's happening is, I think it was a relatively, I wouldn't say it's never been really a new concept, but I think because of social media and because of, our industry and the way the economy has been, that people are just more conscious about it, right? Sure. Because now the government is getting larger and larger chunks of what they have, and they're, people are struggling a little bit too. And so any penny that they can save, especially when they're on a fixed income in retirement, becomes super important. And they need to overcome inflation too. They may be fine when they're 65, but if they don't do proper tax strategies now, what happens if they live to 90?
And if you think about a lot of the things that have happened, right? Even since 2020, you think about the things that have happened, but go back to like 2000 till now. I mean, that's a 24, 25 year period. You go back till then. My gosh, think of, we had the terrorist attacks of 9/11. We had the housing crash of 2008. We had we've had different things. We've had the pandemic of 2020. We've had, all these changes in society that have gone through, that people have gone through a ton of stuff, right? In the last handful of years. And almost anybody alive has really seen this type of stuff, right? I mean, so now you start looking and saying, we've seen all these unique things. What has that done to inflation or the use of my money or this conversation. That's where the planning is so vital, right? And we start talking about examples. One of the things we talk about with people that's a really common one is Roth conversions,
Yes.
right? Well, Roth conversions have been around since 1998.
Yeah.
So if you've been doing Roth conversions through the years, awesome, good for you. If you haven't, if your person isn't talking about it, if you didn't know about it, that's a conversation we need to have, right?
Yeah.
And there's a difference between a conversion and a contribution. We hear that all the time.
Exactly.
Right? So Roth contribution is I got to make money to put it into the account. I'm allowed to put into, the statistics change every year. It goes up a little bit, but $6,500, and I can catch up to 1,000 or 6,000. And I can catch up to 1,000, depending on where you're at and what your number is, when you're listening to this. But the other part of it is that's a contribution. A conversion I can do at any age, any tax bracket.
Yep.
I just have to have assets there.
Exactly. Well, and more importantly, when we're dealing with some of the Roth conversions strategies is whether it's the timing or the age and when they're retired, et cetera. But at 73, I should say, or 75, depending on their birth date, okay, they're going to have to start taking the required minimum distributions. And then then it changes from that uncontrollable or controllable income to uncontrollable. Yeah. And so if we can use some of those strategies over that period of time and just in simple terms, and we're going to spend a whole episode on, and we already have, but we will do some more on Roth conversions. That's one of the most popular subjects people ask us about, is the fact that you can actually then convert from a traditional IRA, pay the taxes on it, and can grow tax-free for the rest of your life. Okay. What's the importance of that then, John? What's the advantage of doing something like that?
Well, using that as a tax strategy, you don't, what you just said, you don't have to take a required minimum distribution out of that money. When you pass away, your heirs get 10 years of tax-free growth if they can allow it to sit there. By taking that out of the spot where you don't have to take your required minimum distribution, you can still take that income and it doesn't count towards your tax footprint.
Well, and a lot of it's math. So let's say, if you're in a 12% tax bracket, and you pay your 12% in taxes, well, then even if you were to take it out of that money and pay the taxes on it, how long does it before, do you break even? Well, if you're earning, 4 or 5%, maybe 3 years, but then you now could have 20 years of tax-free growth. It could grow, so now if we have $100,000, it could grow to $250,000. And then like you said earlier, your heirs have another 10 years that they don't have to take that. So literally we could have a 30-year stretch of tax-free growth.
I don't want to necessarily say it's an exact delineation between quote unquote old school financial people and new school financial people. The old school, when we were growing up, thought process was you had a broker dealer or a stock broker or something like that was trying to pick the right fund or whatnot. Well, that isn't necessarily where the juice is. The most emotional point or the most exciting part is in life right now, because you technically could do that. You can do algorithm-based investing. You can do quantitative investing. You can do, my gosh, but
indexing for that matter. Yeah.
Something simple, right? You don't have to. But the usage of it, that Roth conversion, when to do that, you can do a market time conversion. My goodness, if you pick the right stock at the right time back in 2020, if you picked the right stock at the right time in 2020, you could have converted it at a low point when the market dropped because of the pandemic. And by the end of the year, that was back at full value. And you went, my gosh, I converted it at half price. You could have saved yourself. The conversion makes sense for almost everybody. The timing is where it's really important to talk to a professional and interact on it. But that's just one example of taxes in retirement, right? You're trying to lower your footprint on your retirement accounts.
Well, and not only lowering the footprint, but basically then controlling your income in the future. So, a lot of times people, if you're, especially, they might have been a married taxpayer, then one of the spouses passes away, and now they're a single tax filer. And so what happens now is they still want to have a certain amount of income, but if they were taking it out of their traditional IRAs, it might bump into the next tax bracket. So now we can take an income stream from this tax-free money too, and keep them, in a particularly lower tax bracket. So again, we're not saying that every single person that's listening should do a Roth conversion, but it is a good strategy for many of the individuals that we deal with. And it might be a good strategy depending on you individually, but, seek that professional advice to find out the best way to do that and the timing of it. And wow, again, we go down a rabbit hole every time because we could spend a lot of time more on the Roth conversions themselves. I do want to just specify a little bit more importantly, though, if you're listening and you're still employed and you have the 401ks or 403bs or 457s, mostly we see it in the traditional 401ks, and you have that ability to use that Roth portion of it, do a little bit more investigation on yourself, because that might be an advantage that if you've been working for 20 years and you never changed it,
Yeah, you didn't know.
You didn't know. So
Yeah.
we just want you to think about utilizing that as a tax strategy too.
And as a starting point, right? Talk to someone like us, talk to someone in the industry that you can say, hey, I should, what's the math on this? Should I be doing this? And then are there any other strategies that I should be looking at? I mean, we just talked about one basic, simple strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, like we said, taxes in retirement, we do these workshops all the time. We spend an hour at a workshop and we just scratch the surface of giving ideas to people. And when we sit down with people, we say, hey, here's ideas for you. I mean, there are certain ideas that almost everybody's going to use. Almost everybody's going to look at least at a Roth conversion or have the conversation. There are other ideas that might be more unique to a particular family or particular situation. But again, it's starting that conversation of reminding yourself, not all money is taxed the same.
Yes.
Not how much I make, it's how much I keep, right? And
Well,
that's what we should be talking about.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, I think we can probably give them one more really quick tax strategy that you can use, especially in retirement. Okay.
Right.
And basically we've been talking a lot about the retirement accounts because that's what most people have.
Sure.
But there's that middle bucket that you talked about, John, earlier, which basically is the after taxes.
Sure.
Okay. And so we have to control the taxes with this as well, because what happens is oftentimes people have this bucket of after tax money and it may be automatically generating interest or dividends or capital gains being distributed to them every single year. And it's a line item on their tax return. And then they have to use their income that they're bringing in every month to pay those taxes. Okay. So a lot of it comes down to is controlling that as well. And some of the strategies that we can use by using some actively managed portfolios is a concept called tax loss harvesting.
Yep.
So let's talk about that, John.
Yep. So the idea of tax loss harvesting. So when you look at it, it's unique to a lot of people if you hadn't heard it before, because most of us, when we talk about investing, if you're paying attention to investing, if you're listening to this, you probably are paying attention to investing. If you've never heard this before, there is something called a wash sale. And what it was if you sold a holding, you can't buy it again within 30 days. The government doesn't allow you to buy the same holding within 30 days if you were selling it in that time period because you were changing the tax situation. Hey, I'm selling it while it's down. I'm going to buy it 3 days later, come back up, and I get to write that off. Well, government said, no, you're not allowed to do that. But what tax loss harvesting is instead of saying, hey, you're having an individual holding and you're running afoul of a wash sale, what you're going to do is you're going to say, I'm going to have a similar sector. Let's say the financial sector. Well, in the financial sector, you might have a handful of different companies that are going to have a similar part of your portfolio. So I'm not picking on these companies, but let's say you had JP Morgan Chase and PNC. Those are two people in the financial sector, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have two companies in the financial sector, if I sold one, I could buy another one. Now, my portfolio is going to look very similar, but I have a different holding, so I didn't run afoul of a wash sale. Why I would do that is because they're both probably going to go down in a similar situation, but if I sell while they're down and then they come back up, I get to lock in that loss.
Yeah.
So at year's end, let's say the market is up 15%, but I also acknowledge losses of 12%. Well, now I'm only paying taxes on 15 minus 12. I'm only paying taxes on the 3.
Yeah.
I'm not paying taxes on the full 15, even though I made the full 15.
Yeah. Well, and we see that now it's been a paradigm shift a lot with the indexing as well, because
Absolutely.
If you're using an S&P 500 portfolio, there's always going to be, even in an up year, there's going to be, let's say 30 to 50 stocks that didn't make money that year, right? But you don't get the advantage of taking the losses on that. Where if you were just, mirroring that portfolio in an actively managed and you held those 500 stocks and just for example purposes, you could take the losses on those 400 to offset any gains. Well, I'm sorry, on those 40 or 40 stocks, I should say.
No, but I think it's really, really important. It's a conversational point you should be having, whether it's with us or somebody else. Find someone to have a conversation on this, because this is where we go back to technology changing, right? If you think about this 20 years ago, someone would have had to go in and enter all those transactions and do all those trades, and you would have had to pay for all those trades and all those different things. Now, with computers, with algorithmic trading, or with setup stuff like this, it's very easy. It can be done very low cost.
And there's platforms that will do it even automatically for you.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
And so that you don't even have to think any longer. So that's a really good point. And I think I just wanted to mention that one other strategy. And that's just, again, it may not be right for everyone, okay? But if you are adding taxable income off your, on your light items, from capital gains, dividends, interest, and you're not utilizing that money, it's a different story if you're selling something and using it for your everyday income. But if you're just letting it accumulate, then tax planning and tax management in the after tax sector as well becomes, if not more important, oftentimes even equally important to doing some of the retirement planning strategies.
Yeah. Great point. So we should talk about our holistic happenings, right? This
exactly.
is our kind of our subject that we hit on each time. The reminder, if you haven't listened before, holistic planning is one of the things that we think is vitally important for people. We talk about this all the time as far as just our opinion on it. But the idea of holistic planning is talking about all the different parts of retirement, whether it's estate planning, tax planning, financial planning, in referencing those particular professionals in that subject if we're not licensed ourselves to do that. But it's trying to make sure those things all connect together. And so our holistic happening segment is where one of us then talks about something we just off the cuff came up with in the last week or so since our last recording to think of and give an example. So Mike, do you want to use an example?
Yeah. So today, when I was thinking about what we're talking about, I just, it's almost like I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the issue really is we see it almost on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, the impact of Roth conversions for a lot of the families that we work with.
Sure.
And so I think a lot of it really comes down to is the timing of it and putting the pen to paper when it comes down to that.
Sure.
And we talked a little bit earlier even about the software that we can utilize and so forth. And so so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today because people, when we oftentimes meet people, and we call it the red zone of retirement, which is like the 10 years before retirement and 10 years after retirement. And that's the critical planning time. And so sometimes when people come to our workshops, I want to say it's too late because it's never really too late. But the bottom line is we see missed opportunities.
For sure.
And so what we want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the impact of not trying to miss that opportunity. And a lot of it comes down to is retirement. And between this magic age, whether it's early retirement or traditional retirement, to this magic age of the required minimum distribution, which is either 73 or 75, right? And so oftentimes people have this opportunity to do significant Roth conversions. And we talk about with the tax brackets, what they call bracket bumping, where bracket bumping basically says is that we can now, let's just say, for example, based on their tax bracket, they're making, let's say $72,000. We use that example earlier this year, but the tax bracket says that they can make a little over $120,000 a year if they're a joint taxpayer and still stay in that 12% tax bracket, right? So literally they have this little gap of staying in that same tax bracket of about $50,000 that they can actually then convert that year and pay a low in the lowest tax bracket that we have right now. And I should say, not the lowest tax bracket. If you made nothing, you would pay nothing, right? But literally some of the lowest, historically low tax brackets that we've seen in years. And so, but the importance of a lot of it is just the impact. So for example, if you're not even drawing Social Security yet, you could delay one Social Security. And in that case, now you might be able to do $70,000 or $80,000 or $90,000 for just a couple of years, right? And so we have that software that can kind of show, let's say, if one person retired, they are getting Social Security and a pension. Now, oftentimes the Roth conversions will make your Social Security more taxable, but understanding the math over their life expectancy. And we can actually show specific examples and show over, let's say, till they're 90 or 95 years old. And we're seeing this sometimes, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes, $500,000, $1 million difference over their life expectancy by just paying a little bit of taxes up front and doing significant Roth conversions. Yep. And sometimes we are going to that 22% tax bracket or the 24% tax bracket because for these in particular clients, it makes sense. So a lot of it I just wanted to kind of talk about was just utilizing and understanding that and getting the illustrations to show the math and the importance of utilizing some of these strategies for some of the families that we work with.
Well, and you talk about real quick, just talking about the math and the financial planning software. There's so many different routes that you can go, but the math is out there. If you're listening right now and you say, boy, I like this idea, but I'm a visual learner or I need to see this better or whatnot. The software out there, there's so many different routes you can use, but that really can show it to you. And it can break it down year by year. Hey, based on where we're at right now, you can convert $22,367 in your bracket, right? I mean, you can be very, very particular, but that visual, I'm more of a visual learner, so I like to see it. Okay, how is this benefiting me? Well, if I pay this money now, I'm paying more in taxes. So you're not saving anything today, but I see how much more money it's going to have in the future because of the time value of money or how it's going to grow. And the software can show that.
And it can be done individually too,
Absolutely.
because every year might be different. You
For
might,
sure.
there might be a family situation. You need to take extra money out. And so we have to adjust those, but we just have that flexibility to do that. And that's what's important when we're utilizing some of those things.
For sure. So probably a good spot to leave it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you need to get a hold of us, if you want to reach us directly, you can reach us at 800-2. Mike mentioned earlier, the website is fsa1.com.
Yep. And if you want to go to workshop, you can actually click on there as well. You can take our retirement quiz on there as well. But I think that's a good way to stop today. So thanks for listening to the Retireable Podcast. I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm John Sauger.
Have a great day.
Thanks.
Insurance products are offered through the Insurance Business Financial Services of America, FSA. Financial Services of America is also a financial services practice that offers securities products and services through AE Financial Services, LLC, AEFS. Member FINRA SIPC. Financial Services of America is also an investment advisory practice that offers investment advisory products and services through FSA Advisors, FSAA, a registered investment advisor. AEFS and FSAA do not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by Financial Services of America are not subject to regulatory requirements and standards of care applicable to registered representatives, and are not subject to investment advisory requirements. AEFS, FSAA, and FSA are not affiliated companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual's situation. Please remember that converting an employer plan account to a Roth IRA is a taxable event. Increased taxable income from the Roth IRA conversion may have several consequences. Be sure to consult with a qualified tax advisor before making any decisions regarding your IRA. FSAA and AEFS are not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein, provided by third parties, have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by FSAA and AEFS. Compliance reference 4220194-225.